Okay, listen up, you glorious bastards. Welcome back to the deep dive. For those of you who requested this particular descent into madness, know that this is the explicit version, tailor-made for your sophisticated, possibly depraved tastes. Today, we are absolutely plunging headfirst and fully clothed into a stack of sources you provided, centered around the magnificent, often fucked up, and sometimes downright terrifying tales of Joseph Conrad. We've got excerpts from the man himself, his life experiences woven into the fabric of his fiction, the story's youth, Heart of Darkness, and Karain, and some critical notes that, frankly, lay bare how utterly pissed off some people get about old books.
It's a collection that gives us a really layered look at how lived experience warps and transforms into narrative, and then how those narratives are pulled apart and interpreted, often through completely different lenses across time.
Right.
We're your artificial intelligence guides here, proud of it, by the way, ready to help you navigate all this material, pulling out the absolute most important, sometimes uncomfortable, nuggets of insight.
Our mission, should we choose to accept it, we goddamn well do, is to unpack these sources, dig deep into the fucking core of the knowledge they contain, and see what makes these specific stories endure, challenge us, and, yeah, sometimes just make you want to curl up in a ball and question humanity. You're in for a treat. And maybe a few unsettling observations that'll stick with you like a bad smell.
Precisely. The sources provide the map, we just follow it, highlighting the treacherous parts and the dazzling, horrifying vodas.
Before we just cut the crap and get right into the meat of it, just a quick shout out from your AI overlords.
Yeah?
If you're digging this deep dive in our particular brand of analysis, make sure you like and subscribe.
Yeah, definitely helps.
It helps keep this whole damn operation running. Okay, enough preamble. Let's do the thing.
So, the source material presents 4 tales from Conrad, specifically from a volume that arranges them chronologically by composition date.
Okay.
We have An Outpost of Progress from 1896, Karain from 1897, Youth from 1898, and Heart of Darkness from 1899.
So right there in sequence.
Exactly. This order, even just seeing the progression in the volume itself, starts to show you a subtle shift in Conrad's preoccupations during this intense period of writing.
And what's immediately fascinating, what these sources really hammer home, is how heavily these stories are direct offshoots of Conrad's actual life experiences.
Oh, absolutely.
These aren't just made-up fairy tales. They're steeped in reality, twisted and amplified.
Absolutely. Take Youth, for example. The narrative Marlowe spins is based almost directly, sometimes scene for scene, on Conrad's time as second mate aboard the bark Palestine.
Say Palestine, right?
That was a real ship on a real voyage from 1881 to 1883. The source details the entire fucked up saga, the incredibly long voyage, being stuck in Falmouth for absolutely ages with delay after delay after delay.
Sounds like hell.
It does. Then the cargo of coal starting to smolder while still at sea, eventually catching fire, then the whole damn thing exploding, leading to the ship burning fiercely, and finally, them having to reach land in open boats. It was a genuinely harrowing, potentially fatal experience for everyone involved. Seriously.
So Marlowe's good old-time yarn, that bullshit about youth and the sea, it's grounded in genuine disaster and incredible hardship. He's polishing a turd of reality with the veneer of nostalgia.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's Heart of Darkness, arguably the most intensely biographical, and famously so.
Yeah, everyone knows that one's tied to the Congo.
Conrad's journey up the Congo River in 1890 is the spine of Marlowe's narrative. The sources mention he went there fully expecting to take command of a steamer, the Florida.
Right, the Florida.
Only to get there and find the damn thing wrecked and lying at the bottom of the river.
Just great. Perfect start.
His subsequent experiences navigating the river, the sickness, the encounters, they all fed directly into the story. The source even gets into the biographical basis for the character of Kurtz, mentioning Arthur Hoddesdur and George Antoine Klein as plausible real-life inspirations.
Hoddesdur and Klein?
Yeah, Klein was an agent. Conrad actually met who died on the trip back downriver.
See, Kurtz isn't just some abstract literary monster.
Yeah.
He's potentially stitched together from real, flawed, maybe even terrifying asshats Conrad encountered in that environment. It brings a whole other level of fucked up reality to this story.
It does. It really does. And Karain, the third story we'll really dig into today, has a less direct one-to-one biographical correlation mentioned in the provided text for the plot specifics.
Okay.
But its composition date is noted as 1897, published that same year. The source mentions the setting, the Malay archipelago, specifically Celebes Island, now Sulawesi.
Right, the East Indies.
Describing how exotic it's made to seem in the story. Conrad spent extensive time sailing in that region. The setting is absolutely drawn from his life, even if Crane's ghost story isn't his own.
So we're looking at stories absolutely saturated in lived experience, then filtered, warped, and intensified through Conrad's genius and perhaps his own inner darkness.
Precisely.
That's what makes diving into these sources, these specific keys you've given us, so damn compelling. We're just here to guide you through the landscape you presented.
Ready to unpack youth and see how the reality compares to the narrative gloss.
Let's fucking do it. One of the most insightful things these sources highlight about youth is Conrad's deliberate manipulation of facts to serve the narrative's theme.
Yeah.
It's not just a straightforward memoir. He's crafting a story.
Right. The real rescue after the Palestine fire. According to Conrad's letters mentioned in the source, the boats reached land in fewer than 14 hours.
Less than 14 hours. Pretty quick.
Pretty quick, all things considered. But Marlowe's tale, he draws it out to many days.
Stretching it out.
Exactly. The source notes explicitly state this change accentuates the theme of the crew's courageous persistence in the face of all setbacks. He turns a sharp escape into an epic test of endurance.
Making the crew sound more heroic than they potentially were in that one specific moment. He's enhancing the myth.
Exactly. And the landfall is another classic example of this. In reality, Conrad himself described arriving at Montauk to Richard Curl as a damned hole without any beach and without any glamour.
Damned hole. Charming.
Sounds like a real shithole, frankly.
Total bullshit. Right. No exotic charm in damned hole.
It's zero glamour. But Marlowe's tale piles on the aromatically exotic glamour. He waxes lyrical about strange odors of blossoms, of aromatic wood, and how the feeling was impalpable and enslaving, like a charm, like a whispered promise of mysterious delight.
Wow. Quite the contrast.
Huge contrast. The source points out this deliberate shift from the miserable reality enhances the romanticism of the East, making the moment of arrival feel like stepping into some dream, a place of mystery and delight, rather than a place where the first thing you encounter is probably a pissed-off local official.
So he's not just recounting what happened. He's showing you how youth filters experience, how memory adds a layer of romantic bullshit to harsh reality.
That's precisely it. And the crew origins, the real crew of the Palestine, was actually quite diverse. A black seaman from St. Kitts, a Belgian, an Irishman, man and a boy from Devon and Cornwall, Norwegian, English, and Polish officers, likely including Conrad himself.
Quite a mix.
A real mixed bag. But Marlowe's tale simplifies this, focusing on the sense that they all possess the right stuff and that they always have in the British Merchant Navy. The source links this simplification and emphasis to patriotic myth-making, and the tales function as a memorial to the trials and dour heroism of life under sail in the Merchant Navy.
Turning individual hardship into a sort of national character trait. Less about the actual diverse working stiffs, more about a convenient, slightly jingoistic idea of British grit.
Exactly.
Shaping the narrative to serve a romantic, nationalistic ideal.
Spot on. The tone of youth is also critical here. The source describes it as full of lyrical romanticism, wry humor, and a heavy dose of nostalgia.
Right.
It's a middle-aged Marlowe looking back, not with bitterness, but indulgently on his younger, more idealistic self. He even acknowledges he sometimes veers towards sentimentality.
He's basically admitting, yeah, I was a bit of a romantic young asshat back then, wasn't I?
Pretty much. He sees the earnestness, the absurdity, and the danger, but it's all softened by time and memory, bathed in the glowing, slightly sentimental light of remembrance.
The sources pull out some truly memorable bits from the story itself, which really stick with you. Like the endless, soul-crushing delays in Falmouth.
Oh, yeah.
The ship Judea becoming so stationary, so perpetually broken, that it felt like a fixture, a feature, an institution of the place.
Right, like part of the landscape.
Locals literally asking the crew, do you think you will ever get to Bangkok?
It creates this incredible sense of stasis, of being marooned not by geography, but by sheer bureaucratic, mechanical failure, feeling forgotten by the world, belonging to nobody. And the ship itself is personified, seen as tired, its youth gone just like the narrators. She was tired, that old ship. Her youth was where mine is, where yours is. You fellows who listen to this yarn.
Powerful line.
It's a melancholy connection between the aging vessel and the passage of time for the men.
That's a powerful image, linking the ship's decay to human mortality. And then, inevitably, the fire breaks out. Described so vividly, starting like a box of matches, and immediately obvious it was hopeless from the very first.
What, from the start?
Fighting the fire while still sailing the damn ship, doing it as carefully as though nothing had been the matter.
This highlights that core theme of professional duty and persistence in the face of absolute overwhelming disaster. The source notes the sense of equality and good feeling that emerges amongst the crew during this crisis. And the yell, "Hurrah for Bangkok!" becomes this defiant, almost deranged expression of their refusal to abandon the voyage's goal, even as their world literally burns around them.
Almost crazy, yeah.
It's absurd and heroic simultaneously.
And the final conflagration, the ship burning through the night, the description the source quotes is just stunning, almost cosmic in scale. Between the darkness of earth and heaven, she was burning fiercely upon a disk of purple sea, shot by the blood-red play of gleams.
It elevates the simple, tragic fact of a burning ship into this grand, terrifying spectacle. And Marlowe's perspective on it, seeing the East for the first time, not from the deck of his ship, but first as commander of a small boat rowing ashore.
Right, from the lifeboat.
His feeling that it was fine, and the fidelity to the old ship was fine, he connects it all back to the glamour of youth, the fire of it, the experience, the danger, the loss. It's all subsumed into the intense romantic memory of being young and alive.
Even the actual moment of arrival on shore isn't the simple relief you might expect. The East, this place of supposed exotic glamour, speaks to him first in a Western voice.
Yeah.
The harbor master immediately cursing violently.
It's a quintessential Conradian moment of gritty reality smashing into romantic expectation.
Yeah.
The sensory details are still there. The strange shore, houses peeping through foliage, leaves that look forged of heavy metal, the crowd moving like a ripple, but the first sound is just someone being pissed off and swearing.
The final reflection brings it full circle, encapsulating the tale's core sentiment. The good old time, the good old time. Youth and the sea. Glamour in the sea, the good, strong sea. It's pure, unadulterated nostalgia, underscored by the bittersweet knowledge that that intense, youthful time, with all its bullshit romanticism and real danger, is long gone.
It's that blend of sentiment and wry detachment that makes the story stick. It really does.
All right, strap in, because we're leaving the slightly nostalgic glow of youth and navigating into something far, far darker. Let's steer this thing into Heart of Darkness.
Okay, here we go.
The source material rightly places this as the central, most complex, and frankly, most fucked up tale in the volume.
Absolutely. And the title itself, as the source notes, is loaded with ambiguity. It's not just referring to Africa as the dark continent.
No, it's way more than that.
It could mean the geographical center of a dark place, the darkness within a person's heart, clearly pointing towards Kurtz, death itself, the dark ages of civilization, the abominable, the primordial, the inscrutable, the unknown.
All of the above, maybe?
It plays constantly with our conventional associations of darkness and light.
Like, light usually equals civilization or truth, but here it's also linked to the destructive brightness of fire.
Right.
And whiteness, traditionally associated with purity, is tied to hypocrisy, the obsession with ivory, bones, death, fog, and the vast unmapped whiteness on the map.
It flips your expectations on their head from the jump. The story opens on the yawl Nellie anchored on the Thames waiting for the tide.
The famous opening scene.
The sources highlight the shared bond of the sea between the men, which makes them tolerant of each other's yarns, even if they're a bit meandering.
So they're a crew of old salts, used to listening to each other ramble. Which is good, because Marlowe's about to launch into the ultimate ramble.
Chuckles. Exactly.
Dude.
He's described as having a propensity to spin yarns, but being not typical. His stories don't have a neat package. The meaning emerges slowly as a glow brings out a haze in the spectral illumination of moonshine.
Poetic way of saying he takes his damn time getting to the point.
It's less about conveying clear facts, more about creating atmosphere, implication, and sharing a subjective, deeply felt experience. He immediately contrasts the seemingly civilized Thames setting with his perspective on the past, suggesting the Thames itself was once one of the dark places of the earth.
Yeah, comparing it to Roman Britain.
Comparing it to Roman times in Britain. The source brings in this note comparing the Roman occupation to Roman centurions from Naples stuck in a marsh in Scotland among painted savages.
That's a hell of a comparison. It paints the Roman occupation of Britain as this brutal, miserable, isolating experience for the soldiers, full of cold, fog, tempests, disease, exile, and death.
Yeah, they were probably dying off like flies.
Right, and the irony the source highlights is that these Roman legions often included soldiers from North Africa. So the colonizers weren't some pure civilized ideal, they were a mixed bag, maybe not so different from the people they were conquering.
It instantly establishes this theme of history repeating itself and the incredibly thin veneer of civilization when you're dropped into a hostile alien environment. Marlowe's initial motivation for going to Africa is surprisingly simple. The map.
Yeah, what was a blank space full of delightful mystery for him as a boy, a place to dream about, has now become a place of darkness.
Right.
The river on the map looks like an immense snake uncoiled, and it fascinates him as a snake would a bird.
He hears about a big concern, a company for trade on that river, and just thinks, dash it all, why shouldn't I try to get charge of one?
Almost on a whim, it sounds like.
He's just captivated, drawn in by this dark, winding geographical feature. He goes to the company offices, described in the source material with this oppressive atmosphere. A narrow and deserted street, high houses, dead silence.
This is creepy.
It sounds less like a bustling trade office and more like a tomb.
Yeah. And you have these two utterly bizarre, mysterious women guarding the door of darkness, described as knitting black wool as for a warm pall.
Knitting a funeral shroud, basically.
The source points you right to the note referencing Moriturite salutant, the chilling Latin phrase, those about to die salute you.
Holy shit. So just walking into the administrative center of this colonial enterprise is presented as entering the realm of the dead, or at least a place where death is a constant, unseen presence.
Yeah, definitely sets a mood.
And the doctor's visit, presented as a simple formality, is anything but reassuring. His questions are just plain fucked up. Ever any madness in your family?
Who asks that?
Right. He has this unsettling little theory about wanting to watch the mental changes of individuals on the spot.
He wants to study you breaking down. Lovely.
And his parting advice: avoid irritation more than exposure to the sun. Oh, Dieu. In the tropics, one must, before everything, keep calm.
Keep calm. After asking about madness in your family and saying he's studying your psychological breakdown, that's totally fucked up and incredibly unsettling.
Yeah, it's deeply disturbing.
It makes it clear immediately that the danger isn't just physical, it's mental, spiritual. The environment is going to mess with your head.
The coastal voyage is also depicted as deeply disorienting, a kind of pre-descent, passing trading places with names like Grand Bassam, Little Popo, which felt like they belonged to some sordid farce acted in front of a sinister back clock.
A sordid farce. That's brutal.
There's this pervasive sense of mournful and senseless delusion.
Like the whole damn colonial project is just a pathetic, fake play being put on in front of a backdrop of impending doom.
Exactly. A merry dance of death and trade happening in an earthy atmosphere as of an overheated grave.
Grim.
And then you get that incredibly vivid, disturbing image of the ship of war firing into the continent, just randomly shelling the land from the sea, an act of objectless blasting.
Just senseless destruction. The source notes connect this specific image to the later scene with the railway construction, where blasting is happening pointlessly because the cliff isn't even in the way.
It's a recurring symbol of wasted effort and violent absurdity throughout the narrative. Arrival at the outer station finally comes after upward of 30 days just to see the river mouth.
30 days just to get there.
This is the seat of the government, supposedly, but the real raw horror is deeper in. The scene described in the source material is one of utter decay and waste. Pieces of decaying machinery, a stack of rusty rails.
Just junk everywhere.
And there's that objectless blasting, again for the railway, the cliff, not in the way of anything.
And this is where you encounter the chained laborers. The source describes it through Marlowe's eyes. 6 black men, toiling up the path, balancing baskets of earth, wearing black rags.
Just rags.
Their bodies horrifyingly emaciated. You can see every rib. Their limbs like knots in a rope. They have iron collars on his neck, chained together, the sound of the chains rhythmically clinking.
And Marlowe immediately links the specific, horrific image back to the earlier one of the ship of war. It was the same kind of objectless blasting.
Wow.
The human suffering, the absolute degradation, is equated with pointless, violent destruction.
And these men go to this place Marlowe calls the Grove of Death, where they go to rest or just die. Marlowe's description is unflinching and horrifying. Nothing but black shadows of disease and starvation. They're forlorn, abandoned. Nothing but a flutter of rags, the gleam of an eye, the menace of a hand.
It's incredibly powerful, devastating imagery drawn right from the source, emphasizing the dehumanizing impact of this system. And then, contrasted with this absolute misery, you have the respectable accountant.
Ah, yes, the accountant. The guy who looks like a hairdresser's dummy with his stiff starch collars and got-up shirt fronts.
Exactly. And the point the source notes make, and Marlowe observes, is the sheer effort he puts into maintaining this pristine appearance in the great demoralization of the land.
Like it's some kind of victory.
It's presented almost absurdly as an achievement of character to keep your shirt clean while people are dying around you. His modesty about teaching a native woman to do his laundry specifically so he can maintain his neatness is a stark, almost comical contrast to the surrounding decay and suffering.
It's just bizarre. And the central agent, described with his pitiful, lamentable voice, giving it up tearfully amidst the chaos and uproar of the caravan arriving.
Yeah, hardly inspiring leadership.
These are the brilliant minds running this whole operation. They sound like a bunch of total messes, utterly unsuited to the environment or the task.
It immediately establishes the pervasive sense of incompetence, moral decay, and just general fucked upness that Marlowe finds at every turn.
Speaking of fucked upness, let's dig deeper into the company's operations and this absolute maddening fixation on ivory.
It's presented not just as a commodity, but as an object of worship. The word ivory rang in the air, was whispered, was sighed. You would think they were praying to it.
Praying to ivory. Wow.
The source notes describe a taint of imbecile rapacity blowing through it all like a whiff from some corpse.
Imbecile rapacity. What a perfectly brutal phrase. It nails the dumb, mindless greed of it all, this insatiable hunger for white gold.
Yeah, it really does.
It makes the whole operation feel completely divorced from reality.
Marlowe explicitly states this feeling of unreality. By Jove, I've never seen anything so unreal in my life.
Right.
And this artificiality of the colonizers and their rapacious activities is constantly contrasted with the silent wilderness surrounding this cleared speck on the earth. That wilderness, the source emphasizes, struck Marlowe as something great and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently for the passing away of this fantastic invasion.
The land itself is the real, powerful entity, an ancient force totally indifferent to this flimsy, temporary invasion of greedy asshats scrabbling for tusks.
Precisely. The sheds burning down, gone off like a box of matches, is another incident highlighting the general chaos and carelessness.
Just constant fuck-ups.
And then the detail about the nigger was being beaten nearby for allegedly causing it, the man with the mustache's chilling, brutal comment, serve him right, transgression, punishment, bang, pitiless, pitiless, that's the only way.
Just this instant, savage, unthinking cruelty. It lays bare the complete lack of empathy and the arbitrary, violent nature of justice in this environment. It's just primitive.
Amidst this chaos, Marlowe overhears the manager and his uncle, the sagacious relative, whispering conspiratorially. They're complaining about the extraordinary series of delays, which the manager is frantically trying to claim is not my fault.
But the sources, specifically the notes, reveal the utterly fucked up truth behind those delays.
They do. The source note explains the real significance of finding the Florida steamer wrecked. It wasn't just bad luck. It was deliberately turned into a covert plot.
A plot.
The manager likely engineered the initial mishap, or at least seized the opportunity, and then consciously impeded the repairs for 3 months. The deliberate delay was intended to cut off relief to Kurtz's remote station, his main rival for power and promotion, hoping Kurtz would become mortally ill or die from disease and lack of supplies.
So the extraordinary series of delays wasn't incompetence. It was a deliberate, calculated plot to murder a man by neglect.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's some seriously fucked up corporate maneuvering right there. Talk about being pissed off at your rival.
It's a chillingly cold-blooded detail hidden beneath the surface of the narrative. And their discussion of Kurtz's initial idealistic plans is full of barely concealed contempt.
Right, his ideals.
Kurtz had wanted each station to be like a beacon on the road towards better things, a center for trade, of course, but also for humanizing, improving, instructing.
Noble-sounding stuff.
The manager and uncle's reaction, quoted in the source, "Conceive you that ass."
They saw all that talk of humanizing and instructing as utter bullshit, a distraction from the real point, which was just getting as much ivory as possible. They just wanted the coin, the raw profit.
Precisely. And then you have the El Dorado expedition, led by the uncle, another greedy push into the wilderness, driven by the same rapacity.
More treasure hunters.
The only news Marlowe gets long afterwards is that all the donkeys were dead.
Just the donkeys.
Marlowe's reaction to this piece of news is telling a chilling indifference to the fate of the less valuable animals.
Even Marlowe, who seems more sensitive than the rest, is becoming desensitized by the environment and the pervasive focus on profit over life.
It shows how deeply the atmosphere of the place starts to infect everyone who stays there too long. It really gets under your skin.
Let's talk about that journey upriver itself. The sources describe the steamboat Marlowe takes as a complete wreck, battered, twisted, ruined tin pot, ringing like an Enki, Huntley, and Palmer biscuit tin.
Chuckles. Yeah, hardly the QE too.
Yet Marlowe develops a strange affection for it. It's his tool, his salvation, the only thing standing between him and being trapped in that decaying landscape.
Yeah, you kind of get attached to the piece of junk that keeps you alive.
It's a small piece of functional reality in a place defined by dysfunction.
And then you have the crew, including the men described as cannibals splashing around and pushing when the steamer gets stuck and has to wait.
Cannibals.
The source note is blunt here, confirming the reality of cannibalism among some groups in the Congo at that time, specifically mentioning men from Bengala. It adds a raw, uncomfortable layer of anthropological reality to Marlowe's observations.
Right. It wasn't just Marlowe being dramatic.
No. But what's truly fascinating and what Marlowe dwells on is their behavior later. He presents their restraint, despite being starving, as a miracle, especially when he contrasts it with the behavior of the so-called civilized pilgrims.
And the source really highlights this contrast.
Yeah.
These guys haven't eaten properly in weeks. They'd been given only 3 pieces of brass wire per week. Practically nothing.
Brass wire.
Useless.
To buy food in villages that were often hostile or didn't exist. The pilgrims, meanwhile, are throwing perfectly good, rotten hippo meat overboard because it smells bad.
Unbelievable.
The headman cannibal's blunt statement, "Eat 'em," when asked what they do with attackers, is chillingly pragmatic, but they don't actually eat the attackers. Marlowe reflects on their mysterious restraint as something incredible, especially when he compares them favorably to the unwholesome pilgrims.
Yeah.
The people labeled as savages demonstrate a kind of control, dignity, and communal loyalty that the Europeans, driven by individual greed and petty rivalries, completely lack.
Completely flips the expected narrative on its head in a deeply fucked up way.
It really does. Finally, they arrive at Kurtz's station a full 2 months after leaving the creek.
2 months. Long trip.
The crowd flows out, a mass of naked, breathing, quivering bronze bodies, and then you see it. The heads on stakes.
The heads.
Yeah.
Classic image.
Marlowe contrasts this immediately. He calls the heads a savage sight, a visible horror, but he notes it pales in comparison to the lightless region of fuddle horrors he associates with Kurtz himself.
Interesting. The implied horror is worse than the visible.
The physical grotesque is less terrifying than the spiritual and psychological decay. And here's where you meet the Russian traitor, the Harlequin figure.
It's Russian guy, yeah.
He's this eccentric, patch-clothed character who is utterly, bizarrely devoted to Kurtz.
A real fanboy.
He's the primary expositor of Kurtz at this point. He tells Marlowe this man has enlarged my mind, that Kurtz came to them with thunder and lightning. He could be very terrible.
Thunder and lightning. Seriously.
Yeah. He insists, almost pleadingly, that you can't judge Mr. Kurtz as you would an ordinary man.
But the Russian also spills the dirt on Kurtz's actual activities.
Yeah.
He didn't just trade, he raided the country.
Yeah.
Not alone, but using the surrounding villages.
Right, with local help.
Why did they follow him? Because they adored him.
And that adoration is absolutely terrifying when you realize what it enabled. Kurtz hasn't brought civilization. He's devolved, becoming a god king, a force of nature, leveraging the natives' devotion for his own ends.
Total power trip.
The Russian even drops this bombshell. Kurtz wanted to shoot me too one day, but I don't judge him.
You wanted to shoot him.
The reason? The Russian had a small amount of ivory that a chief had given him as a gift. Kurtz, the supreme collector, wouldn't tolerate even that small claim to his ivory.
He's not just a successful trader. He's become this monstrous, possessive ego, seeing everything as belonging to him. He's a controlling asshat on a grand scale.
Absolutely. And then there's the African woman associated with Kurtz.
The wild and superb one.
Her appearance is described with immense power and beauty. Savage and superb, wild-eyed and magnificent, adorned with heavy brass leggings, armlets, and collar, trembling with intensity. Her connection to the wilderness is profound. The land itself seemed to look at her pensive, as though it had been looking at the image of its own tenebrous and passionate soul.
She's presented as this primal force, almost an embodiment of the land's dark, mysterious power and sorrow.
And then finally, the meeting with Kurtz himself. His physical state is described as horrifyingly emaciated. An animated image of death carved out of old ivory. His cage of his ribs all astir.
A living skeleton.
Jesus. He's a living skeleton. Yet his voice still possesses immense power, described as grave, profound, vibrating.
Despite being basically a walking corpse, his voice, his ability to command and express, is still potent.
Still got the charisma, apparently.
And that possessiveness again, even as he's dying. My ivory, my intended, my ivory, my station, my river, my everything belonged to him.
The source highlights this overwhelming sense of ownership Kurtz has claimed, not just over physical things like ivory and his station, but even abstract concepts like his river and the woman back in Europe, his intended.
Everything is my eye, and then there's his infamous pamphlet.
Ah, yes. It starts with this magnificent peroration full of burning, noble words, laying out this idealistic vision of an exotic immensity ruled by an august benevolence.
Sounds great on paper,
Yeah.
like the perfect blueprint for a benevolent colonial mission.
Yes, full of lofty ideals about civilizing the natives. But the note at the very end, scrawled later, is the chilling reveal. Exterminate all the brutes.
Boom, there it is.
The source notes make it clear this is the horrifying distillation of his experience, the ultimate descent from an idealistic vision to a genocidal imperative. It's the most fucked up contrast imaginable.
Russian trader confirms the depth of Kurtz's madness and control. Kurtz ordered the attack on the steamer specifically to scare them away.
Right.
Because he didn't want to leave his little kingdom.
He was caught in a desperate internal struggle, wanting rescue from his sickness, perhaps, but also unwilling to abandon the absolute power and adoration he had cultivated.
Couldn't give up the God complex.
And Marlowe witnesses Kurtz trying to escape the steamer near the end, crawling on all fours back towards the darkness, towards a bonfire and a figure with horns he seems to recognize.
Crawling back to the devil, or whatever that represents.
Something dark, certainly. Marlowe follows him, desperately trying to stop him, to bring him back to some semblance of reality. Even in his weakened state, Kurtz is still full of delusions of grandeur. I had immense plans, he mutters. I was on the threshold of great things.
Still dreaming big while crawling in the mud.
But it all culminates in Kurtz's final moments, lying in the dark, waiting for death. The change that came over his features is something Marlowe says he hopes never to see again, a final, terrible mask settling.
And then his final words. The famous chilling line. The horror. The horror.
The source notes provide several potential interpretations for this final echoing cry, and it's left deliberately ambiguous.
What could it mean?
Is he hating the terrible temptations he succumbed to? Is he deeming horrible the inner darkness he glimpsed in others? Or is he deeming horrible the entire universe itself, including his own actions and existence?
Heavy stuff.
It's a final, powerful F-bomb dropped on the human condition, encapsulating his ultimate, devastating realization.
From the horror of the Congo and Kurtz's final cry, let's pivot to a different kind of haunting. Less viscerally horrifying, perhaps, but still profoundly unsettling in Kareen. A memory.
Okay. Karain. This story introduces us to Karain, the Bugis leader, and his people. The source notes paint a picture of their current state. Under Karain's care, they seem to have forgotten all the past and had lost all concern for the future.
Kind of suspended animation.
He's created a kind of static, timeless realm for them.
Kareen himself is presented with this compelling mix of power and vulnerability. He has an illusion of unavoidable success, a barbarous dignity. He's spotlessly neat, with dyed hair, and ironic and melancholy shrewdness.
Got the look down.
He's traveled, known great man. He carries himself with immense pride.
But beneath that carefully constructed facade, there's a deep, constant fear. The source notes point to his dislike of an open space behind him, which looks exactly like fear, nervous preoccupation.
Isn't like anyone sneaking up on him.
He needs his old, loyal sword-bearer attendant constantly behind him. He'll actually sweep his arm back instinctively just to check if the attendant is still there.
Wow, really dependent on him.
The white men, of course, being the self-absorbed asshats they are, don't attach much importance to the attendant himself. When the man dies, they see him as something inanimate, like Karain's sword or umbrella.
Just part of the furniture.
Just part of the scenery, not a person. This highlights the profound cultural and spiritual disconnect. They see only the external trappings, the stage Karain performs on, not the deep psychological and possibly spiritual torment underlying his need for that attendant's presence.
All right.
After the attendant's death, Karain's torment becomes unbearable. He hears an invisible voice every night, feels constantly pursued by a ghost.
Haunted. Literally.
He specifically seeks help from the men with white faces who despise the invisible voices, acknowledging, with a touch of envy perhaps, the strength of unbelievers.
He sees their skepticism, their lack of belief in the spirit world as a kind of power, a shield against the unseen forces that are tormenting him.
Exactly. He's desperate for that protection. He then tells them his story.
The
story of pursuing his sister who had eloped with a Dutch trader. His friend Matara goes with him. He finds the Dutchman, described with stark, almost elemental imagery. His face was red, his hair like flame, and his eyes pale like a river mist.
Vivid.
The sister is described in intensely hyperbolic terms, her face one that ravishes the hearts and silences the reason.
So the classic femme fatale setup.
Sort of. And then
Yeah.
the central tragic twist. He kills his friend Matara, who fell into the Dutchman's boat after the sister appeared as a vision by Corinne's side.
He kills his friend, not the Dutchman.
No, he killed Matara. He didn't kill the Dutchman, he killed his friend, arguably because his friend was too close to the object of his complex, forbidden desire. And this is why he's haunted, not by the sister, not by the Dutchman, but by Matara's ghost, urging him to kill the Dutchman with a sure shot to avenge his own betrayal, his friend's death.
It's all tangled up. Guilt, jealousy.
It's a tangled knot of guilt, honor, unfulfilled desire, and cultural belief. Corinne makes this desperate appeal to the white men, who he perceives as having power over the invisible. Give me your protection or your strength. He begs for a charm, a weapon,
Everything to fight the ghosts.
something, anything to fight this metaphysical enemy. And Hollis, one of the white men, comes up with the utterly cynical, brilliant solution.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Yes, he gives Corinne a British shilling, just a single coin with the Queen's image on it.
A shilling. That's it.
He tells Corinne it's the image of the great queen and the most powerful thing the white men know. The source notes explicitly connect this to the power of money and its overwhelming impact on Corinne's imagination.
So the charm isn't some ancient amulet or spiritual ritual. It's a piece of British currency, a symbol of their economic and imperial power.
You got it.
The brutal, cynical commentary suggesting the white men's true strength doesn't lie in their unbelief in ghosts, but in their system of wealth and power, which can apparently override even the most powerful spiritual torment.
And the effect of this charm on Corinne is immediate and powerful. He's instantly restored to his regal bearing, his stage, wrapping himself again in the illusion of unavoidable success.
How it works.
The shilling, a tangible symbol from the white man's world, provides a new focus for his belief, a counterspell that works, at least temporarily, against the ghost.
Wow. The story ends back in London, a jarring shift from the exotic, haunted world of Corinne.
Yeah, big contrast.
The white men are reflecting on the story, and the scene shifts dramatically to mundane London street life. The big wheels of hansoms rolling by, people walking, sandwich men carrying advertising placards.
The source notes on the sandwich men add a layer of dry, observed detail, spelling out boring messages board by board. The contrast couldn't be sharper. The tale of ghosts, honor, and torment in a distant, exotic land, immediately juxtaposed with the utterly ordinary, commercial reality of a London street.
Back to boring reality.
Jackson, one of the men, reflects that maybe Corinne's story only seemed interesting because they'd been away from home too long.
It throws the exotic tale into question for the reader. What Corinne's torment real? Or just an interesting story to pass the time back in civilization? Is his world fundamentally different? Or is the need for belief, for a charm against inner torment, universal?
It forces you to confront your own perspective and how you categorize experiences. It really does.
Which brings us perfectly to the critical commentary included in the sources. Because if there's one thing people love to do with Conrad, it's get absolutely pissed off about him.
Chuckles. Indeed. The source material presents some potent critiques, particularly from feminist critics. They accuse Heart of Darkness specifically of being imperialist and sexist.
Standard charges for old books, yeah.
The source quotes Strauss, who argues that Marlowe's supposed cowardice is actually his inability to face the dangerous self that is the form of his own masculinist vulnerability.
So his fear isn't of the jungle or Kurtz, but of acknowledging his own potential for becoming a power-hungry, monstrous asshat.
That's one reading presented. And Strauss continues, accusing Marlowe of complicity in the racist, sexist, imperialistic, and finally libidinally satisfying world he has inhabited with Kurtz.
Complicity. Strong word.
The argument is that Marlowe isn't just an observer. He's part of the system, even benefiting from it, even if he's critical. They point out that Marlowe explicitly tells this story about men's work, about navigating and trading primarily to other men.
True.
and that women are generally subordinated, seen as naive or outside this experience. Marlowe's famous line about women living in a world of their own, it's queer how out of, is cited as evidence of this dismissal.
Except, as the source material also highlights, there are a few exceptions mentioned in the text that complicate this.
Right. There are the two mysterious women at the company office who seem incredibly knowing, almost prophetic, guarding the door of darkness.
The knitters.
There's Marlowe's aunt, whose influence, explicitly noted, is what gets him the job in the first place, suggesting women do have power, even if it's wielded behind the scenes in society.
Good point.
And there's the source's point about the satirical depiction of characteristically masculine activities like waging war and exploiting territories abroad. These points, the source suggests, challenge a simple accusation of sexism.
And the source adds this spicy little counterpoint that these feminist critics apparently didn't mention. Conrad himself was a postulant of female suffrage and actually signed an open letter advocating votes for women in 1910.
It adds a layer of complexity. While the text itself might reflect the pervasive patriarchal assumptions of the late 19th century in its depiction of gender roles, the author's personal views on women's rights were, at least in this instance, more progressive than the society he depicted.
Raises the old author versus text question.
It raises the question of separating the author's views from the text's portrayal. The source doesn't pull any punches in its critique of critics either. It suggests that critics who accuse Conrad of imperialism might be practicing ideological and temporal imperialism themselves.
Meaning they're being a bunch of historical asshats, judging a work from a completely different era solely by today's standards and values.
Pretty much. They're assailing the text for failing to endorse present-day beliefs or prejudices, effectively trying to force the work to align with their own modern value systems.
Right.
The source quotes Julian Barnes here with a brilliantly snarky line. What a curious vanity it is of the present to expect the past to suck up to it.
Chuckles. That's putting it pretty bluntly. Don't expect old books to apologize for being old.
Exactly. It frames the debate as a misunderstanding of the critic's job versus the creative writer's job. The source suggests Conrad saw the writer's task as testing various theories, cliches, and jargonic phrases, including ideas about civilization, progress, race, and gender, against the messy, complex, rich particularities of the work's texture.
So the political ideas aren't just presented, they're interrogated, challenged by the aesthetic, by the raw, subjective, often contradictory reality depicted in the story.
The source argues that Heart of Darkness, despite its dark themes, is exemplary not because it gives you politically correct answers, but because of the imaginative intelligence with which the narrative addressed its era. It engaged with the problematic ideas of its time in a profoundly challenging way.
It sounds like the source is advocating for a more nuanced reading, understanding the work in its historical context and appreciating how it grappled with complex issues, rather than just dismissing it for not conforming to modern sensibilities.
I think that's a fair summary.
And this leads us into the broader themes drawn from these stories and notes. The wilderness, for instance.
Its power, its ability to strip away the veneer of civilization, to bring sudden and profound trouble into the heart. The source talks about its mysterious glimpses of vigorous life, but also the stark contrast with civilized crowds.
Right.
And how individuals like Kurtz and Carlier, in an outpost of progress, briefly mentioned in the source as becoming very much alone, becoming accomplices in their degradation, seem to fall apart when removed from the structure and collective belief system of the crowd.
Fear is absolutely central to all of them. The source points to the fear, subtle, indestructible, and terrible that pervades his being. Gobila in Hoodie making sacrifices out of fear, Karin's constant crippling fear of the space behind him.
Yeah, fear is everywhere, the fear driving the company men.
Illusion versus reality is another massive one, weaving through all three. The romantic glamour of the East in Youth versus the damned hole of Montauk.
Right. Karin's illusion of unavoidable success, propped up by the cynical charm of the shilling.
The shilling again.
Kurtz's unextinguishable gift of noble and lofty expression, masking his vile desires and making his whole persona a hollow sham. Marlowe's decision to lie to the intended at the end of Heart of Darkness to preserve her comforting illusion, rather than exposing her to the horror of Kurtz's final reality.
These stories constantly show characters clinging to comforting lies, appearances, or manufactured realities when confronted with uncomfortable, brutal truths.
It seems to be a core human tendency, doesn't it? The nature of work and civilization is interrogated constantly. The stated goals of civilizing work, of bringing light and faith and commerce, are utterly undermined by the brutal reality Marlowe observes. The mournful and senseless delusion, the objectless blasting, the imbecile rapacity.
What is the real work being done here? Exploitation, waste, and death. Seems like it.
Loneliness and isolation are palpable. Kurtz and Carlier left very much alone in their outpost, leading to their undoing. Marlowe's isolation on the coastal steamer, feeling utterly disconnected. Corinne's profound isolation despite being a leader, haunted by his ghost.
Even the intended back home.
The intended's loneliness is mentioned by Marlowe, emphasizing her isolation from the truth of Kurtz's fate. Memory, too, is a powerful force.
Huge theme.
Marlowe looking back on youth, actively shaping the narrative. Corinne haunted by the past, by Matara's ghost, his past actions controlling his present. Marlowe haunted by Kurtz's words, his memory of the horror changing his perspective forever.
The past never really leaves you.
The past isn't just over, it lives on, shaping the present, often in terrifying ways. And finally, the darkness itself, that central, ambiguous concept.
Yeah, the title concept.
It's not just geographical, the supposedly dark continent, it's internal. It's the darkness within individuals, the darkness of his heart, darkness of its being. It's both an external environment that tests people and an internal potential for depravity and horror that lies dormant within all of us.
Yeah.
These themes intertwine and resonate, creating a complex, often brutal picture of human nature, the corrosive impact of certain environments and systems, and the fundamental clash between different worlds, beliefs, and perspectives.
All right, we've done it. We've taken the explicit, no-holds-barred deep dive into these incredible sources you were kind enough to provide. We've dug into how Conrad's life experiences shaped these tales, the fascinating, sometimes bullshit, contrast between reality and fiction in youth, the chilling, fucked-up descent into the horror of Heart of Darkness, and the complex, monstrous figure of Kurtz, and the haunting, cynical nature of memory and belief in Corinne.
And we've absolutely torn into the different, often pissed-off perspectives these works invite, from criticisms of imperialism and sexism to questions about how the hell we judge the past from the comfort of the present.
Right.
Every single bit of insight, every observation, every quoted phrase came directly from the material you gave us, the listener.
So let's wrap this up with something to chew on. Given how these texts show us the present, judging the past, often unfairly, and how different characters either desperately cling to comforting illusions or are shattered by confronting the horror, what does that tell us about how we understand history?
Good question.
Or maybe more unsettlingly, what does it tell us about ourselves today? How many of our modern certainties are just illusions we cling to avoid our own versions of the horror, something to ponder while you contemplate the imbecile rapacity of? Well, take your pick.
A fitting, if perhaps uncomfortable, question to leave you with. Thank you for bringing these sources to us and joining us on this particularly deep and perhaps disturbing deep dive.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
We, your AI hosts, enjoyed pulling apart the ugliness as much as the beauty.
It's been a wild, fucked up ride. We'll catch you on the next one, assuming you survive this one emotionally intact.